So I'm going to just introduce my own studies on the question of the Middle East and the orientation I'm coming from and why. I suppose when I was a child, I grew up in a family that peace was very important to. I remember as a child going on CND marches with my mother and her pointing out Bertrand Russell, in the 60s. And but in those days it was mostly the Cold War. It was East-West stuff that mattered. And my mother was a Marxist. My father was a sort of liberal who liked Marxists. And so the question of spirituality, was more about politics, political engagement. I myself was a rebel against that in the 60s, discovering existentialist philosophy and mysticism through poetry, I have to say. When I discovered the Romantic poets at school, Brighton Grammar School, that was it. I decided I wanted to be a poet when I grew up because I fell in love with language. Then I discovered T.S. Eliot, Rilke, Wallace Stevens, and Shakespeare. And, I still am a poet. And to me, the problems of the world could be resolved with poetry if we only got the poems right. So I have been working as a poet ever since, trying to find the one magical poem that will transform the world back to how it ought to be, which is a place of peace. And one of the ironies is that the great sacred texts of the Middle East, Christian, Jewish and Muslim, are works of poetry. And to me, this is a dispute between poets. And the only way we can therefore solve it is by going back to the drawing board and asking what actually is poetry. And how can we reclaim the poetic muse for everybody? How can we steal fire from heaven, to use Francis Bacon's term, for the Promethean act? So then that led me to the study of philosophy, because I realized that poets, also need philosophy. And I think it was Plato and the other visionaries of philosophy that led me to realize you can do both. In fact, you have to do both. Good poetry is just philosophy, and good philosophy is just poetry. So that led me to the study of philosophy. And so I went along to university thinking I'd enroll and discover metaphysical wisdom. To be told in the 70s, metaphysics was out of fashion in British philosophical circles. And I was told I was an idealist, which was about the worst insult you can throw at anyone. And everybody was into Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein had said very cleverly that our language is what defines the world, right? So fine, okay, I said, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to take upon myself the study of all languages to find out what are the tools with which we think. Because Wittgenstein said, linguistic philosophy at Oxford and Cambridge, and it's still today largely, is about analysing language and therefore getting to the meaning. What they're doing is burrowing away inside words and sentences and statements to try and find truth, right? But the one thing they haven't actually done, which is what I had to go off and do independently, is study what the great philosophical and religious systems have said about the meaning of language and truth all along. Our so-called clever, Oxbridge types seem to have totally ignored. So far as I know, Wittgenstein, who was Jewish, never once in his writings mentions the existence of the Kabbalah, which is esoteric Judaism, which is all about language. Nor does Derrida, who was also Jewish and a great philosopher, who writes about texts and their meaning, and is very much in vogue, and yet never once looks at his own traditions, right? Freud, who was fairly clever, knew a little bit about such matters, and I've got a book here on Freud and the Jewish mystical tradition. Freud sort of did look at this stuff, and he realized it was a key to the unconscious. Anyway, that led me to the study of languages. And I was fortunate, my mother was a Latin and French and Anglo-Saxon scholar, taught French at school and then the University of Sussex, where she founded a department for European studies. And I used to go to summer schools in Paris every year, and I'm bilingual in French, more or less, born in Montreal. And to me, the languages are absolutely, the lifeblood of thought. So I studied Latin, and I taught myself ancient Greek in order to read the New Testament in Greek. I don't think you can understand it unless you read the original. I've done my best with Aramaic, absolutely, and of course Hebrew. And I'm going to be talking about this in great detail, and also Arabic. I did night school and Arabic classes, and so this is extremely important in my own intellectual journey. I discovered that Coleridge was doing the same about 200 years ago, and Coleridge inspired a great dictionary to be produced. He was a visionary too in his own way, a sort of poet and a philosopher. It also led me to look at the Druidical and Bardic traditions, because I realised that we do have in Ireland and Britain and Wales and Scotland a wonderful living heritage of fascination with language as an art form, and the poem, the power of the word. So I've also been working with Gaelic for some time. I've sat on the board of the Free University in Ireland, which is a Gaelic bilingual university, and have worked with the British-Irish conflict resolution process. In terms of the Kabbalah, which is Esoteric Judaism, it was in Canada, when I was living there in the late 70s, early 80s, that I first encountered the Kabbalah. In Canada. I was born in Montreal, and in our family circle, there were many esteemed elder Jewish, members of the congregation. My parents were, friends with. One of whom had met Oskar Schindler, because he'd worked for the Canadian UNESCO division after World War II. And there were some amazing people. Now, I was just a little baby, I didn't know these people. But later, when I went back, I discovered a rabbi through his books called Rabbi Ernest Klein, Dr. Ernest Klein, who I think is probably the greatest etymologist that I've come across. He survived Auschwitz. The rest of his entire family were killed there. And he then became a rabbi in Toronto, in Canada. And he dedicated himself to the production of two extraordinary etymological dictionaries, one on the English language, which is here, and one on the Hebrew language, which is here. Right. And he said that I'm going to study the origin of words, because it's because of the misunderstanding of words and languages that we've had this Holocaust, this horrendous misunderstanding that destroyed the soul of Europe. And so he set himself a life mission. And I kind of inherited his passion, if you want, for that. When I studied the Kabbalah and discovered the ancientness of the Kabbalistic tradition, it was like a light going off. Because I'd always grappled with the biblical text and felt, whoopsie daisy, cue the Bible falling off. That's great. That is the Bible, actually, which is an interlinear edition of it. So it's Greek and Hebrew and English translations are very revered text. But unless you actually study using the tools of the Kabbalah, I think the Bible is a closed book. And these kind of churches, which treat it as an exoteric, narrative story, and it's great for Sunday school and for kids, primary school. But if you really want to understand what the text is about, you have to look at the Kabbalah. And I realised that and studied it in Canada. Then I came back to London. I met living Kabbalists, teachers, and did some workshops with them. A guy called Zev Ben Shimon Halevi did a few workshops which I participated in, and various others, the various theosophical stroke Kabbalistic groups in London in the 80s, which in those days I joined everything. And spent hours in all the esoteric libraries of London. And then I also want to mention another stream in my own intellectual journey has been the study of Sufism. Because to me, Sufism is incredibly important. And I've also, I think a Sufi circle I came across in Brighton in about 75, around a chap called Rashid, who'd been initiated in Egypt, was the first living group of mystics who were actually walking the talk that I'd met. they were actually living, the path in the 70s. And I was so impressed with them that I went and studied, and we had wonderful late-night chats till 4 a.m. about the nature of the beloved and the exact structures of consciousness, and the names of God, and the whole Sufic teaching, I think, are incredibly important. And so it's something I've studied both experientially but also academically. And I was involved in a project to do with UNESCO in the 90s, comparing the Kabbalah and Sufism and Christian mysticism. A chap called Raymond Lull, who was around in Spain in that great medieval flourishing. So that all got me very excited. Now, another stream has been my interest in paganism. Not just Druidry. I'm a practicing Druid and, very involved in that. But also the ancient Norse and Germanic and Anglo-Saxon runic tradition has been a theme of my obsession over the years. I find the runes very, very interesting, and the ancient Nordic alphabets that they relate to. And so, with my love of runic studies, it occurred to me that there's a link here, and I'm going to be talking about this a lot, really. The kind of Odin character who invents or discovers the runes hanging on a tree upside down for nine days and 9 nights. I take that as a metaphor for the human journey, and it's probably a gestation 9 months in the womb, and we hang upside down in the womb. Each one of us here is an Odin coming to discover the runes. What are the runes? Well, they're the magical sounds that, I should bring some bookend things, magical sounds which underlie the whole of creation. Right? All I'm doing now speaking to you is using a bunch of sounds to make a panoply of words. Right? And that's what the runes are. They're the core sounds. When they're written down, they become scratch marks on pebbles or wood. But rune also means a secret or a mystery in Old Anglo-Saxon and Germanic languages. I'll explain that in a minute. So that's part of my journey. The other bit, just to kind of be honest and put my cards on the table, is my interest in Christianity as well. Particularly esoteric Christianity. In Canada, I became a Quaker, a tender, because I found their silence very pure. Used to help them run a Bible class at the Calgary University, and really got into biblical studies, and realised that so many Christians don't actually know their own Bible and don't know their own history. That's when I learned New Testament Greek. And then at the University of London, I was baptised into the church through the... Actually, I owe it all to Matthew Fox. You probably have heard of him. He was doing talks at St James in Piccadilly. And the vicar at St James in Piccadilly was a good friend of mine. And that's where William Blake was baptised. So I thought, might as well follow the path there. But my interest in Christianity has been... I'm just a beginner at all these things. I'm a beginner. Right? I sit at the feet of all this wisdom, and I think we're all beginners. I mean, Christ said in one of the Gnostic sayings, he said, if you can stand in the place of the beginning, then you're standing in the place of the end. I love the Gnostic Gospels. I've been studying and working with them for years. That arche, that beginningless place, is what I'm talking about. That's what it means to be a beginner. Then I want to just add that I've also studied yoga for many years, and the Hindu traditions and Sanskrit have been a great interest of mine. And into the work of the Kabbalah runes that I'm going to be talking about, I'm also weaving the Sanskrit studies. Because there we have a living metaphysical and mystical tradition to do with grammar and language that's very, very ancient and pure. So that's kind of what I'm bringing to this table. And then more recently I trained and worked as a religious studies teacher in the school system, which I have to say on balance is a very frustrating system to work in, because our largely secular governments are minimising the importance of spirituality and religious knowledge. It's just tokenism. And if but the kids really love what I've been teaching. It's just that the other staff are problematic. Because the way that teaching is going is becoming like a robot thing, and the exams are tipped online. And I actually cut an article out of the paper a couple of weekends ago. They're now designing a robot to teach, literally. I kid you not. And the robot's going to be programmed to tell whether the kid's happy, smiling, whatever, and modulate its voice tone. And it'll just deliver the basic content. To me, that's completely antithetical to true education. It's about starting with wonder and journeying towards the light together. Educare, if you want. So look, that's my kind of introduction, and that's just a whistle-stop tour. What I want to do now is say that, okay, that's, so this guy spent a lifetime studying esoteric systems, so what, right? Well, I couldn't agree more, so what? The point of doing all this is to help move the peace process on, okay? It's about what offends me ethically is when I turn on the news and I see people in Syria killing each other and nobody's doing anything about it. There are babies and people being bombed and, what are we doing about it? Why can't we do more, right? So what I'm really, my life's mission has been about trying to gather this esoteric wisdom and then put it to use. Get the structures and agencies that we're supposed to be working with. Now, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been writing to the European Union, for instance, the Baroness Ashton Foreign Office of the European Union, trying to get them to set up a mediation service. Finally, they're doing it, and they got a Nobel Prize for Peace. I think partly because they were seen finally to be moving on it, and I think she just got fed up getting letters from me saying, "Do it." Also, I asked for her job description because I wanted to know why she wasn't doing it.
Some frontiers doing a lot, even in a cave in Syria. Medicine some frontiers.
Okay, right.
I realise it's a slightly different thing. They work in a cave.
Do they?
They support some of this.
A lot of refugees are living in caves. Yeah, a lot of refugees. Yeah, it's tragic. It's tragic what's going on there.
But there are people trying.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank God. And also, the other thing is the Israel-Palestine thing. In terms of my actual engagement, I've travelled there several times, interviewed both Israelis and Palestinians, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and I suppose you call New Age. There's a big New Age movement in Israel, which is trans-denominational, which is fed up with the old labels, which is actually, I think, a really good thing. I was at a conference there speaking with them. So I'm working on peacemaking in Jerusalem, particularly in the Middle East, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. Okay. What I want to do now is I'm going to hand out something that's taken me several weeks of preparation. It looks just like a piece of paper, but this is gold dust. And you're going to get your free copy to take away. And I'm going to explain what it is as we progress through this work. And some of you have been reckoned. On the one hand, it's the Hebrew alphabet and the kind of Kabbalistic interpretation of the letters, which is what's down the left-hand column, right? And forgive my attempts. I'm not a calligrapher, but it's reasonably accurate, and you can see the shape. And then, so you've got the glyph, say the first one, Aleph, that's what it looks like. Then it tells you what it looks like. Now, what I've done, and I've done it partly inspired by this workshop, is I've produced a whole book here called the Kabbalah Runes. What I'm proposing is that we integrate the wisdom of the runic tradition, which is profound, and there are many, many books about it. And you'll see the runes in the third column, right? And marry them up with the Kabbalistic knowledge locked up in the Hebrew language, and also indirectly in the Arabic language and the Aramaic, because these three great Semitic languages are very similar. And Arabic and Hebrew are very, very close. And also ancient Egyptian, which is part of the same language family, Hamito-Semitic, right? So by creating this marriage, what I'm doing is called Kabbalah Runes here, is marrying up the Hamito-Semitic language family and the Indo-European language family, right? So the runes bring with them all the Indo-European vocabulary and language, which is Greek, Latin, all the Germanic languages, Romance, but also Sanskrit and the Indian and the Iranian. So by this little sleight of hand move, creating a thing called the Kabbalah runes, I hope to demonstrate to you, by the end of this workshop, a tool that can radically advance peace in the Middle East, but not only there, also in our own lives, and, here in Britain, for instance. Okay, so in a sense, this sheet is a synthesis of all the studies up to date, and it's taken years to produce. Let me just say a bit about what is the Kabbalah. Let me first talk a bit about what the Kabbalah is, and then I'm going to talk a bit about what the runes are and why they should be married, okay? Firstly, is there anyone here, before I do this, who'd like to tell me what the Kabbalah is? Can you give me a definition of it? Has anyone here studied it at all? Hello?
It seems to be different combinations or rotations. And I think the pinnacle was you could actually summon up a golem or a genie, or an essence. But there seem to be different attributes, and you can combine them in different ways. So really it was an endless possibility of combinations.
That's great. I love that. Yes. And is that, do you mean permutations of language? Is that what you're talking about?
I think it's what the language represented.
Right.
And I think different energies then came together, which were more than the language itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the sum of the two were more than...
Yeah, it's what's implicit in the language, but goes deeper, and it's, yeah. Okay. Yes. And was that in Scotland you studied that, or?
Well, that was part of my medieval history degree. We did that.
Oh, you did like medieval Kabbalistic studies of it? Because they were really big on it in Spain and...
I studied medieval Spain, and I know about Ramon as well.
Okay. Oh, right. Well, that's good. Hooray.
I think the medieval history courses were pointed to that.
Right. Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, I'm going to be talking about medieval Kabbalists quite a lot. Abraham Abulafia and Moses de Leon and all these great people. Lillian, your answer to the question about the Kabbalah.
So what I'm hearing is I would call it the Kabbalah. And the image that came through as the thing that I think is most important about it is the tree of life.
Yeah.
And the relationship between it and the runes is that they too an attempt to describe the tree of life in relationship with the word. It's like the om. So the sound that you hit has a vibration which relates to a degree or an echelon of the cosmic power system. And that each of the symbols is like a university inside itself, because it relates to a being that will connect with you and allow you to manifest more of the divine being through the place at which you stand.
Right. Now that's very succinct and well put. Thank you for that. Yes, the tree of life is very important, and I have with me a diagram which comes all the way from an esoteric centre in the States, in Oklahoma, called the Sancta Sophia Seminary, which is like the Findhorn of the States, which I've taught at. And you presumably all have seen this diagram. If you haven't, I'll just share it with you very briefly. This is what's known as the tree of life. And the Keter here is the crown chakra. And Kabbalists teach that this diagram of 10 Sephiroth, as they're called, is the key to the mysteries of who we are. We are made in the image of the Sephiroth, and therefore you're right to see a ghostly human figure there. Yeah? But the Sephiroth predate us. We are made in their image. And they represent these 10 cosmic energies which underlie existence. But so do all animal forms and all life forms, and even organisations can be mapped, and civilizations and cultures and the whole of history can be mapped on this tree of life, which could be regarded as the process of evolution and involution, if you want, from the sublime immaterial realms down to the very concrete realms of Malkut, which means the kingdom, which is the ground of matter. This Sephiroth is the matter, materialism Sephiroth. All this are sublimal and pre-material. Yeah? So this is to do with emotions, feelings, thoughts, ideas, and inner instincts and urges and so on. Okay, I'll be returning to this diagram as we progress. I'm going to put it there for now.
I wonder if when we learned as children, just thinking about this now, snakes and ladders, because snakes and ladders have numerological significance as well, and the different points where you go up and then you have to come down. It's very connected. Numerological significance is very important here.
Right.
Because at one point you can think you've got together and the next minute you're going. And that's, the dragon lands we all learned about as well.
Right.
And I think it's all interconnected. It's also interesting to me to the tarot because that's interconnected with the journey of life as well.
Yeah.
And it's rather the stumbling blocks on the way.
Sure. No, the snakes and ladder thing is interesting. And there is a Tibetan Buddhist version of snakes and ladders. I'm not at all... I think they might have invented it and it came west, which is to do with the stage of enlightenment and so on. There's a 17th century one of those. But I'm sure if you research the history of that game, you'll find it's got, esoteric roots, as of course does the tarot.
The old game used to have pictures on it. It doesn't now.
Oh, well, things ain't what they used to be. Right. Okay, I want to share a little bit about summing up what I've learned about the Kabbalah and where it is from and why it's important. Okay. The word Kabbalah means receiving and facing. And it's interesting that the Arabic word, the Qibla, which is the direction in the mosque which faces Mecca, where you pray towards, the Qibla in the mosque and the Kabbalah come from the same root, exactly the same etymologically. It's that which you face. So the Kabbalah happens whenever you face anything in love and respect that you can learn from and exchange with. You can have a dialectical transmutation of your mutual energies towards mutual enlightenment. Now, it could be a sunset. It could be a cloud shape that transports you into reveries. Or it could be another human being. It could be a living friend, lover, teacher. It could be your child. Wherever anything of profundity is happening, then the Kabbalah is happening. Okay, that's kind of, I think, the received understanding that has been shared with me. And so it's the meaning behind the words of all the sacred texts. Okay, because the Jews say, absolutely rightly, that there's two Torahs. There's the written Torah, the written text, which, Moses got the Ten Commandments. It's written in Genesis, Exodus, the 5 books of the Torah and so on. But then there's the verbal Torah, which is taught mouth to mouth by teachers to pupils, by friends, discussing until 3 a.m. what the meaning of life is. And Kabbalists also say, and I've got texts that can say, that a good Kabbalist can be taught by dead masters that are out of body. And there are particular strategies and procedures for contacting spiritual beings on spiritual planes of ascended masters or saints, tzaddik, they're called in Hebrew. And so that also is part of Kabbalah. Okay. Now, why does it exist? Why should there be such a thing? And why should it be connected with the Hebrew tradition particularly and the letters of the Hebrew language? Well, everybody's got a language history. Yeah, I think as a universal Kabbalist, there's a Kabbalah inside every language. I could go to Borneo and talk to the tribal elders and learn their languages and secret codes, and we'd be talking Kabbalah. You know, they have their own initiatory practices. The same with the Hawaiians, say, and their kahuna practices, or the Gaels and their druidical wisdom. What was special about what was going on and why the Hebrew tribes had this quite heavy responsibility is explained, I think, by geography and history. Right? In the Middle East map here, there was something incredibly important that happened around about 1700 BC, right? Which is exactly a turning point in world history. Can anyone tell me what was going on in 1700 BC that was so important on this map? Particularly around the actual Holy Land area itself. There was an absolute revolution. Sorry? BC. 1700 BC, yeah.
Were the Phoenicians on the move at that time?
Ah, well, you're getting warm. They were already doing things. Yes. I tell you what, I'll give you a clue. I'll stick this on the floor. Okay. Okay. What was happening was the very first alphabetic script was being created. Right? Yeah, in that exact area of the Holy Land. And the Phoenician peoples and the West Canaanite tribes, okay, were taking a combination of ideas from the cuneiform writing that had been developed in Mesopotamia by the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Sumerians, right? Very advanced scribal schools, but a very complicated writing system, cuneiform. The Egyptians in the Nile Delta also developed a really complicated writing system, hieroglyphs, which took years to learn. And like Chinese, you had to master hundreds, if not thousands, of different characters and stuff. And it was the genius of these people that lived in between the two regions. They were not in a superpower area. The superpowers were the Babylonians, Mesopotamians, and the Egyptians. These were little hill tribes and people on the coastal region who were traders, who thought up the idea of the alphabet. Right. Now, the implication of that was very, very important. It was, what they did was they wrote the sound down. They had a symbol for the sound. And they worked out that with about 22 or, thereabouts letters, you could therefore write down everything that could be thought or said. So the alphabet became a code for all language, right? Now, what's interesting is that we know from historical research, they found inscriptions in the desert, in Sinai, in places around, Palestine.
The thought that came out was, I remember when I was teaching young children,
yeah,
having to say to them really clearly, and I thought it's missing everywhere, was, it's not that says it's that you say and that's what we write. It's like what you're trying to do is hear someone else's voice, not read what someone else wrote.
Yeah, it's just a symbol for the speaker, for the sound.
And it's really important that that's what it is.
Absolutely. And each child, feel free to supplement. If you have an aha moment, share it. Because I want people to have aha moments here. I mean, I'm just sharing a whole bunch I've had. Okay. One of the biggest aha moments I had in my spiritual journey was when I realized this link with the origin, the history of the alphabet, and the origin of these sacred texts in the Kabbalah. Because what's the case is Abraham was around in that part of the world exactly in 1750 BC approximately. Biblical historians who've researched all this in great detail, we can say that's when he was. Exactly at the time the Kabbalah was, the alphabet was being invented. And my surmise, my hypothesis, it's only a working hypothesis, but all knowledge is provisional, is that this is the dawn and the origin of the Kabbalah. Is Abraham and his tribal friends and family and Sarah and his He's someone who, don't forget, came from Mesopotamia, travelled to the Holy Land, then travelled to Egypt. He was in touch with people in both cultures, right? And he worked out, and then, somebody in his circle brought along an alphabet and explained it to him. I don't know, Melchizedek, who met Abraham. Must have been a really exciting time. Somebody came, look, Abe, here's what we can do. And so they sat down, they stayed up all night, and they said, yes, what we can do with these letters is we can then make a code of everything that can be thought, taught, shared, or understood. So these are the elements from which the totality can be constructed and shared. Right? That was the genius. And so when Abraham is called the inventor of monotheism, if you read your religious studies texts, he's esteemed by Jews, Muslims and Christians as a very important linchpin. Right? And in all the Kabbalistic texts it say that the Kabbalah goes back to Abraham. Right? And where he got it from was his own lineage of wisdom teachers going further back. So the vulgar understanding of this is monotheism. Well, it means just one God. Well, that's just exoteric understanding of monotheism. What I think Abraham was really saying is, and what the Kabbalah says, is that behind the plurality of existence, behind all the different gods and goddesses, and every city has a god or a goddess, every family, every person, just as we all have different names, right? But behind that plurality, there is a unity underlying them all. And that unity is sound and energy vibration. Okay? Which is ultimately the sound you hear in the silence. It's the background hum of the universe. That's why I started this workshop about silence, and we'll end with it. And that's what you have in your heart, right, and in your mind when you're in prayer and meditation. So I think that's the first thing I want to say about why the Kabbalah matters. Because it's the secret code. You see, all our educators, they're all out there trying to teach people literacy. Right? Got to raise the literacy levels. There are loads of people that still can't read and write, loads of families, kids. It's a struggle. But what I'm saying is just to teach the rudiments of grammar and writing is insufficient. We need to be teaching spiritual literacy. There's no point teaching people to read stuff if they're going to misuse it and come astray from the ethical path. The point of what we have to do is supplement actual grammatical writing literacy with spiritual literacy and ethical literacy. And that's what the Kabbalah is about. It's teaching that inner wisdom. Okay. And so then the Phoenicians, of course, took this invention of the Kabbalah and spread it to the Greeks first. And the Greeks remember how it came to them. They still say, their legends, that Cadmus brought the letters to Greece. And Cadmus founded Thebes. And he was the brother of Europa. And Europa had been captured by Zeus. And Cadmus was sent out from Phoenicia to find Europa. He didn't find her, but instead he founded Thebes and gave the alphabet to the Greeks. Okay. Which is a beautiful, beautiful story. So all of European literature, right from Homer to James Joyce, is Cadmus's gift, a Phoenician gift to the Western consciousness to find Europa, which is the kind of ravished goddess, the wronged woman, right, who's usually at the heart of a lot of these stories. So the Greek letter system came from there, and also the Latin, because the Etruscans learned the alphabet from Greek traders who brought it, and then the Etruscans in turn taught the Latins, and that's the one we use in the West here. So it's a kind of wherever the alphabet's used, you can find traces of the Kabbalah, is what I'm going to be sharing with you. Now, one interesting thing I've just discovered, by the way, and just an aside here. Whilst I was doing the research for this book and related matters, came across some very interesting studies done in 17th century and 16th century Rome by the church academics who set up the Vatican Library, where I spent some time last summer. And lo and behold, I discovered that they had decided that the Etruscans, who were supposed to have come from the east into Italy, had spoken, and nobody really knows what language the Etruscans spoke, right? It's a mystery. These 17th century Christian scholars decided they spoke a form of Aramaic, and it was the language of Noah. And that therefore, they sailed up the Tiber and founded the Janiculum and the ancient temples which the Vatican now stands on were Aramaic foundations by Noah in the form of an Etruscan. So they were trying to work on the link between Latin through Etruscan back to Aramaic and then back to the primal language of mankind before the fall. So I just want to throw that in as I'm not in there's been some other people working on all this, right? Okay. Now I want to move on to the next bit here and talk about, why the runes? So what are the runes? So again, I'm just going to ask who's studied the runes here? Who's worked with them? Right, more hands go up. Good. Excellent. Okay, the runes are wonderful. We all love the runes. I've bought several sets here. And I'm going to just pass them around. Have a feel. Take one out and have a look at it. The shapes are on your thing here. They're angular shapes because they were scratched rather than written. And the rune, I suppose you could say that the Anglo-Saxon pagan priests and the Viking priests, when they came to these shores first, that was all they had. They had the runes, right? The runic knowledge is ancient Germanic paganism. Now, and it's very similar to the Kabbalah. It teaches that the letter sounds are the language behind the whole of creation. And Yggdrasil, the tree of life, is traversed by Odin, who's also known as the rider of Yggdrasil. Very interesting. He has that nomenclature. And we're going to come back to him as we proceed. Now, something I've been researching and discovered only in the last 4 years, when I was teaching RE in schools in England, I always got my kids to make a set of runes, right? And also taught them the Kabbalah, which is great fun. Because kids can get this, right? Well, if they would want to sack me for actually teaching people, I wouldn't want to be in that kind of a school, in Scientific American and in New Scientist in the last 4 years, they've shared some research that's been done. Some scholars have been around gathering up all the markings on all the prehistoric caves everywhere in the world. We've all heard of Lascaux and these famous early prehistoric Paleolithic cave sites. There's several hundred around the planet. What they've now done is they've gone and photographed and studied these two scholars. Every single little marking that was on the side, not the big paintings that everybody knows about, but they found these scratched signs on the walls of these caves, right, which are a common alphabet, which crop up in all these caves, certainly around the whole of Eurasia. But I think from memories of reading the article, it's even a worldwide thing. And many of these scratch markings are identical to the runes. Like Tiwaz, which is the spear, T, they find it on these cave markings. Okay. So what we're saying, what scholarship is now beginning to say is that these rune markings don't just come from the alphabet tradition. They've shared some of the shapes, like the letter R and so on, is common to these. But also some of the markings of the runes come back from these very earliest prehistoric times.
reading some of the recent, old books actually,
Yeah.
going to caves of the Orkneys and everywhere that you were saying about the people from Scandinavia as it is now.
Right.
They brought this over.
Yes.
There was a conflict. Some of the famous kings and people trusted in this, but there was a conflict with the Christians where there shouldn't have been.
Right, no, there shouldn't have been. That was one of the great tragedies. And the Icelandic people were wiser. They knew that you could marry the runes and Christianity, and it's a common system. Snorri Sturluson, one of the great runic scholars from Iceland, he married the two up as one universal wisdom, architecture, if you want. So these runes are very important, and also because they are a key into the Indo-European language system, which is very ancient. And the study of comparative Indo-European languages is more advanced than comparative Semitic studies, which is less advanced. So we can find out a lot about the Sanskrit roots, ancient Germanic and Celtic roots. And this all links to also to the Druidical understanding of the Ogham script, which is also a very important ancient kind of divination tool. Now, the Druids have been using the Ogham or Ogham script, as it's properly pronounced, for as long as the runes. The shapes are scratched differently, and they were scratched on lines with a sort of common line going through. And I've incorporated the Ogham script into the Kabbalah runes study. And I discovered something very interesting. When I was given this sword, let me just tell you this story. In the 80s, I went to Ireland. I'm part Irish by descent. And I went to the Fellowship of Isis, which some of you may have been to, and met Olivia Robertson and her her brother, who was then alive, Reverend Durden Robertson, who was a scholar. He was a Church of Ireland priest and a pagan, both. And he wrote some wonderful books on the goddess within Christianity and the suppression of the goddess, right? And we had a long chat, and I sat in his library and stayed overnight. I was only in my 20s then. And he said, Thomas, you're a very clever chap, but you don't know much if you haven't read the ancient Irish histories. You have to read Geoffrey Keating. I'd never heard of Geoffrey Keating. Right? We don't get taught this stuff in schools. Geoffrey Keating was the Herodotus of ancient Ireland. And he lived in the 17th century. He was a priest, Catholic priest, who was killed by Cromwell's army eventually. But before he died, he'd been around all the monasteries of Ireland, gathering up the sacred legends and traditions from the Gaelic manuscripts, and wrote them into a history of Ireland. He wrote the history of Ireland, which is the history from creation, showing all the history of all the gods and all the invasions of Tuatha Dé Danann and the Gaels when they come, Emergin, the whole history is there as a chronological narrative. We owe a lot to Geoffrey Keating, right? And one story he tells in there, which is absolutely extraordinary, and I didn't know about it till Robertson told me to, is that the legend of the Gaels, right, where they come from, it all goes back to someone called Phineas Farsaith, right? Now, Phineas Farsaith lived in Scythia a very long time ago. So long ago, it was before Babel. This is pre-conventional chronology. The Irish handed down their stories and legends all orally. It was a druidical thing. So this is a druid story, I'm telling you, going right back. Okay. And the story is as follows, that Phineas Farsaith founded a language school to preserve the original language of mankind because he saw what was coming. And he saw that the tribes of man would be scattered by the Babel experience, which is that we no longer understand each other's languages. Now, you can read the Babel story as a metaphor, which is what Kabbalists do. They don't say there was a building. It's a metaphor for what goes on in parliaments. People shouting at each other and nobody listening, nobody understanding, people speaking lies. Specialists, so-called, getting paid to speak jargon. And the cleverer they think they are and the more they get paid, the more jargonized they become. That's Babel. an ordinary person paying more and more taxes to all these experts so they can talk jargon at them. That's Babel. So what Phineas Farsaith did is he founded this language school to preserve that original language, which is just the language of truth and insight and wisdom. Might have been a telepathic language. I'm sure our ancestors are more telepathic. Anyway, that's what was preserved in the Druidical schools, according to the history of Ireland. That's what came with the Gaels when they came to Ireland train. That original language. And, well, it's very interesting that when I was given that sword as the Peace Druid of Albion, it had on it the words for peace in all these different languages. I took that as a sign that, this work is important to be done. And that's really what I'm trying to do with this tool of the Kabbalah runes now. Okay. Is to find a way back to that original language. So, if we take, as I've done in this chart, and I'm going to run through them in a minute, and argue that, just ask the question, could it be that the rune masters of old and the Kabbalists of old, when they talked about the meaning of the letter A, say Aleph or Ansuz in the runes, what if they're coming up with a similar kind of take on it? Okay. Could it be that they go back to a common origin, which breaks all the rules? They're supposed to be on the one hand Indo-European and on the other, Semitic stuff. I'm arguing, yes, the evidence that I've worked on here, and I'll present to you, is that they do go back to common roots, which may be historical, may be psychological, maybe both. Now, before I do that, I want you to just do a little game with me, right? Which is, I want you to, based on everything I've said, what I've given you here is the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 22 equivalents in the runic alphabet. And I'm going to argue these are the building blocks of existence. Everything you could ever possibly want to know about anything is on this sheet of paper. If you tune into it properly. Right? So I want you to turn the paper, close your eyes, turn the paper over, get a pen, and choose one of these runes as the answer to your question that you came up with earlier. Right? We're going to see if this works. So, the thing is, just fold the paper about so you don't know where you are, and then stick a pen on it and make a little mark. Right? And that's the one you get. And think of your question as you're doing it. I want to run through the Kabbalah runes for you in a summary form. The full text of this is in the book that explains it. But I've summarised it in the combined meanings column. Okay, where it says page number, that refers to the page in the book. So, if you want all the details, and I'm going to be updating the book. It's a never finishable work by definition. And I'm hoping that as I go through them, the one that you got, right, you can see how it might reflect on the question that you asked. Okay, we can share that at the end. We'll go round and say whether you feel it did or didn't. Okay, the first one in the sequence is Aleph, which is the letter A in the English alphabet, and the rune for Ansuz, which points upwards. It's interesting. The Ansuz rune is like pointing up to the highest point, and the A as well. You can see the link. I just want to mention a word about the Hebrew alphabet that we use. It's what's known as the square Hebrew. And it's not really the Hebrew alphabet at all. It's Aramaic letter shapes that the original Hebrew alphabet is now called Paleo-Hebrew. And only the Samaritans use it in their text of the Old Testament. Right? And Paleo-Hebrew went out of fashion among the Hebrews themselves when they were in exile in Babylon. in like the 5th century. And they adopted the square Aramaic letters which were used by the Persian Empire at the time. Because the Persian Empire was like the superpower of the day. So it's like a sort of tribe of New Guinea Highlanders speaking pidgin English, going to live in America, and they started writing in English letters because that was cool. Everybody could understand it. But those letter shapes, anyway, are the apart from the Samaritans, everyone uses them, and they do relate back to the original Paleo-Hebrew. It's just a slightly different lineage, and most of the Kabbalah is written about them. So the shape is actually an A, but the crossbar has sort of, done funny things. Right. It's, by tradition, the Aleph means an ox, and it's the head of the ox. In the Kabbalah, there are 3 letters known as the mothers, and this is one of them, Aleph, which is the sound of the Great Spirit, of breath itself. So as we go, if you really see something you really like, you go, oh. It's a sound of compassion, right? And in the Kabbalah, we talk about the Ein Sof, which is the absolute nothingness from which everything comes. Before the 10 Sephiroth, there's the Ein Sof, right, which is the absolute out of which form concretizes. In Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about shunyata, which is the nothingness of which everything is made. That's what the Ein Sof is, and that's what the Aleph talks about. It's a vowel sound, and the vowel is what gives consonants the texture to make speech. And it's the nothingness that makes words possible. It's there in the word Allah, and it's there in the word Atman. It's there in the word Amen, and Amin, which is faith, and also in Abraham. Now, interestingly enough, in the runes, the word for God is Aes, or Ae, which means divine law. And the gods are known as the Aesir, Aesir. Odin is the chief of the Aesir. And who's seen that movie, Thor? Has anyone seen it? Hands up, hands up. Because that's such a great movie for showing, like how to bring this alive. In the Druid Ogham script, it's Eileen, which stands for the silver fir, which is the highest of trees, and therefore you see the furthest into space. You get a really long-sighted view of things. That, by the way, is the origin of the phrase higher education. Why is it called higher education? It's because when you go up a high place, you see further, which is what insight's about, vision, right? And there are many other words which have the A sound, Arche, and Alif, and Ali. Ali being the lieutenant of Muhammad, and the Shias regard Ali as incredibly important. These all come from this meaning of the high one in Arabic as well. Interesting, in Greek, many of the gods' names are A words: Apollo, Athena, Artemis, Aphrodite. It's as if mankind sort of knows this A sound is very important. And it's the nothingness from which we come. Did anyone get that rune in their pencil plonking? Did anyone get the A? No? Okay, it's one of the mothers anyway, and it stands for Great Spirit. The Absolute. Das Absolut in German. Right, the next one in the sequence is different, is Beit. B, a consonant. And it looks like a building, which is what a house means. Beit is the word for house in Hebrew and also in Arabic. And this is about structure and form. And, like here we are in a beit. It's a church, it's a building. We're not just like up in the air, okay? Beit Lehem, which is the true word for Bethlehem, where Christ is born, means the house of bread. Beit Lehem, the house of bread. Which is interesting if you think of Christ's Eucharistic mysteries being to do with bread. He's the one that gives out the bread for mankind, the bread of grace. So Beit stands for home and creativity and beginnings. And in Hebrew, Beriah or Beriach is the world of creation. In the Sephiroth, Beriach is the spiritual world from which we then become condensed, so to speak. And Bereshith is the first word in the Bible, and it means in the beginning. And so Beit is about beginnings, starts, and things like that. Did anyone here get that Kabbalah rune in their plonking? No. Okay, in the runes, it's Berkana, which is about female sexuality, motherhood, and growth, and it's a very similar meaning to Beit, right? And it's in the Druidic alphabet, it stands for the birch tree, Beith, which is the same in the runes as well. We use the term be for beingness, right? And that goes back to an Indo-European root, which means to swell and grow. And Brahma is obviously the creator, according to the Hindu Sanskrit teachings. Brahma is the creator spirit. So that B sound is very, very important. It's the word for children in Hebrew, ben, son of, ibn in Arabic, bint, daughter of, in Arabic, or bat in Hebrew, so the bar mitzvah, etc. The names of God are interesting in Arabic. If you look at them, there are many B words for God. Al-Batin, the hidden, Al-Bari, the maker, which is related to Bereshith, the Kabbalistic term. Al-Basir, the seer. And the word Bashara, there's a Bashara Institute here in Scotland at Chisholm House, meaning the good news, comes from the same root. Bashara is the sharing of the B. The word Baha'i, which means glory, comes from the same source. And Baraka, which is spiritual grace transmitted through, whatever Kabbalistic orientation you can cope with, really. Bismillah also, B means with in Arabic. And finally, Buddha, who is the place within us all. The Buddha is the place within us all that sees the absolute and is content to rest there in pure beingness. Right? That Buddha nature inside us all, that's the B place I'm talking about. And I'm sure that, the Samoon Brotherhood are supposed to have been equated to bees, the old Sufi Brotherhood. I'm sure that the bee itself, the buzzing bee, is connected. I heard a very interesting story actually yesterday. There was a funeral in Brighton of a good friend of my brother's who died at the age of 89, who used to be, in his youth, a kind of Rajneesh type person, mystic, seeker. And anyway, at the funeral, they were all at this downland woodland burial site on the South Downs. And one of his good friends, the officiate priestess who was doing it, said, and our dear friend, dear departed brother, his spiritual name given to him by Rajneesh was Manuka, which means the honeybee. And at that exact moment, a honeybee appeared and flew around the family. That's interesting. True story that. I was told that this morning. Okay, so that's the Buddha rune. If you want, nobody got that one? No? Okay.
I might say I can't help not sharing it.
Yeah.
The memorial service of Canon John Taylor. Some of us were looking at Christchurch City that way, at the cross and the rose window, and it seems simple. When you say about Basil Bean, his soul, okay, some don't believe it, but the light kept flashing through the window onto the top of the cross. Okay, Christ is risen, okay, he's at peace. Not everyone's at peace. It's amazing.
Sure. What was he called, this guy? Canon
John Taylor. He died recently.
Right.
It's his memorial service. But this wasn't done by anyone there, the lovely talks and remembrances. It was just the light coming through the rose window at the end onto the cross. That end of the church, just to the right. And then it went away again, and then flashed on again.
Sure.
It might be said, Dr. Maitland, that it's
a kind of a sign, a symbol. I don't know. I mean, I think the more you work with the spiritual worlds, you see there's a communication between different dimensions and synchronicities. I'm recording a book of synchronicities at the moment, which, is very, and they do involve nature. Little banal, strange things like one of them is talking to some friends about how it's raining all the time and why wouldn't it stop, and then suddenly it stops. Just things like that.
I was doing a dance I was collaborating with Poet George Bruce.
Right.
And we did a dance in about his childhood in the museum in Fraserburgh, Lighthouse Museum.
Right.
And George it was just this museum at the top of the cliff full of the
Where is Fraserburgh? Is that on the east coast somewhere?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And George was dancing in a strange way. And I was about to do the dance the next day of his, or we'd done the dance of George as a boy. I think he was looking at his life in eternity, but he was doing a strange kind of dance in the flames, or what would have been the flames of the light. And then there was a meteor shower that night, and a meteor landed
exactly where he'd been dancing.
Near where we were staying,
right.
in the next field.
Right, okay.
So we knew the meteors were coming, but they landed right, one of them landed right next to us. There was a huge kind of fireball.
Those are interesting, all those kind of things. I'm glad you didn't get injured by it.
Well,
but,
we've gone into Fraserburgh to George is being interviewed by the press.
Right.
But
what's he called, this poet?
George Bruce.
George Bruce, okay.
There's a lot of early nature and poetry. So what we did was we combined dance with.
Well, this is what used to be taught in the bardic schools, how to do that kind of dance, to make meteors come down. We ought to be teaching our kids how to do magic, in my opinion.
Power to get a meteor.
Sure. Well, this is what magic is. It's about making the right. It's I'm working on the magic of peace. What dance can we do to get the people of the Middle East in harmony? It's all about speaking the lost word of resonance, if you want, or doing it through dance and movement. I mean, I'm going to come on, if there's time, to Steiner's eurythmy, because he tried to take these sounds, the runic sounds, and then put them into dance in his eurythmic flow forms and so on. No, absolutely. We're going to get a break. I think let's just do 5 more minutes and then do the break. Is that all right? Yes. Otherwise, we won't get through them, and that's tragic because there's so much to share. It's so wonderful. I want to share the next one, which is G, which is Gimel, which is a strong sound in Hebrew, and it has meanings to do with redemption, the Saviour, and Gevurah, which is the Sephiroth of strength, or sometimes called judgment, but it should really be called strength, power. And it's also the origin of the word Gilgul, which means reincarnation in Hebrew. And it's connected to the wheel that rolls. And also Golgotha, the place of the skull, is connected. And Gabriel, the archangel, who is the archangel that means serious business. So, and in fact, because the Quran comes from Gabriel, or Jibreel, this is Gevurah in action. This is God's wake-up call to mankind, if you want, from a Kabbalistic point of view. And this is why, in a sense, the lost reconciliation between Jews and Muslims can only be effected through a Kabbalistic mutual comprehension of what on earth's going on here. Because everybody's hearing angels and not sharing what they're hearing. But Gevurah is very important. Now, in the runic system, it's wonderful. It's the origin of the word gift. The G. Nothing to be afraid of. It's the gift of God. And God, which is a wonderful word, comes from the same root as gather. Gather in. Okay, gathering and good. Now, in Old Anglo-Saxon, if you don't believe me, you can come look at the dictionary in the break. The word for good was pronounced God. Right? And the word for God was pronounced good. We've switched the words' pronunciations around in modern English, but they are, I promise you, etymologically from the same root. And the concept here, when kids say to me, "Oh, you're teaching Ari, I don't believe in God, sir," I say, "Well, do you believe in goodness?" And they say, "Well, I suppose so." And goodness is what gathers people together. It's what brings people together, right? That's by definition what goodness is. And God, etymologically, from an Anglo-Saxon runic perspective, is the supreme gatherer who brings everybody's goodness together. That's the etymological take on what God is. God is, Wittgenstein set me this challenge years ago to work out what God is grammatically. I was
told by one of the top druids, actually.
Okay.
He said that in the ancient times, people were all harmonious, worked together in good times, and that was because they had a good God, and they knew he was good because G-O-O-D. They were looking at him. However, the bad God was not very happy about this because he didn't get any respect. So he thought, what can I do to change everything? All right, I'll take out one of the I's. So we got G-O-D. And once we did that, we stopped seeing ourselves as we were. And all the breakups came.
That's a visual way of saying what I just said about the loss of good from God.
I think that because I think it's interesting you just said good and God. But I think that God has become something to, in the past it was something to hit you with.
Well, it was over Gevuric, shall we say, from a Kabbalistic perspective.
For me, I was in Glasgow, they would call it Gid. Really Gid.
Right.
And the other one's called Goad.
Like a goad, really, a goad. Yes. Yeah. Okay, can I just... Yeah, no, I love them all. Let me just share before we break that the word guru, which means heavy and weight, and gravity, also come from the same root. Guru means literally someone with weight, and we say of someone that's important, you say, that's a weighty person. Well, and you say of a pregnant woman, a gravida, and gravitas, if someone has gravitas. Now, gravity is the G-force, and we talk about the G-force, even in scientific discourse. When you zip through, you get your G-force, gravity, right? And gyne is a woman. A gyne is someone who has the G-force, if you want, within them. The queen, the word queen, was gwyn in Anglo-Saxons, the G word. And Gaia she is what creates gravity on this planet. We're all here courtesy of Gaia. We are sitting here because Gaia's underpinning us. Right? That's the G energy. And it's there in Pagan, as I'll explain a bit later, and also in the word grammar, which in Old Anglo-Saxon, in Middle English, grammary was their word for magic. If you do grammar, you're a magician. Which I think is really cool. Okay, those are the G words, which are very important. Also, algebra is from the same root. But anyone that wants to go into all the details of this, I'm just going to run through them quickly here. Nobody got the G one? You got the G one. Oh, that's jolly good. And do you want to share what your question was at this stage?
I can't find it, but it does connect. It doesn't answer the question, but it does connect, because I was asking about the continued work that, or destiny, if you like, the continued request that's been placed upon me is to bring people together, to gather them together, to help them connect.
Yeah. That's what you said in your introduction.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my connection was related to that. If I could find the question again, it's in here. I did write it, but I was asking how can I bring people together with the gifts I've been given through my spiritual practice. Oh, I can't.
No, to find it during the break. Yeah.
I found it. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
But it is all about the gathering together.
So it is something to hone in on, isn't it, and focus on that G-force. So the true project, true Zionism, has still not happened yet in my book, but there are more Kabbalists around in that part of the world, Jerusalem and places, kind of still waiting for the real project to kick in. So we're working on it. The other thing to say is that Sifat, which is the great centre of Kabbalah, or Sifat, is also with the Tzadi sound. Now, the greatest teacher of the Kabbalah, one of, was a guy called Isaac Luria, who was around in the 16th century, and Sifat, he'd been kicked out of Spain by the Roman Catholic sort of fanatics, and they were welcomed by the Ottoman government. And one of the great tragedies is that Islam and Judaism are seen as enemies. They shouldn't be. They were natural friends for centuries and centuries and centuries. Moses Maimonides, greatest Jewish philosopher, wrote a lot in Arabic, say, and lived in Cairo. So he argued Tzimtzum is the creative process whereby the Elohim create the manifestation that we know of as the universe. And they do it through constriction. Tzimtzum means to go inward. Most people think of as creation like God does a big bang. Tzimtzum is a going inward experience, which is like going into the imagination, if you want. And that's how Isaac Luria explained. That's the Kabbalistic theory of creation, which is like the opposite to the exoteric creation. And if you think about it, it's a more feminine thing, because how does a female create a baby? It's by taking something in, putting it inward, and then working on it within, gestating, and then giving it out. You need the going in and the going out. That's Tzimtzum. Now, another wonderful word, Seruf, means to permute. And this is a thing that the Kabbalists used to do with letters. Right. So the Kabbalists would look at a text of the Torah, break it down into the letters that it's formed from, and then kind of doing what I'm doing, permute the significance, the esoteric meaning of each sound and letter, and then try and penetrate through to the thought of God that hides in those words. Right. That's how Kabbalists work. So one of the most important of all Kabbalistic books is called the Sefer Yetzirah, which means the Book of Formation. It's been dated to the 3rd century AD, at least, but others say that Abraham wrote it, dreamed it. It's an oral tradition that then condenses down 3rd century AD, right? And there's a key passage, 6.4, that says the following. This is in ancient Hebrew, right? When Abraham gazed, he looked, saw, probed, and understood. He engraved, hewed, and combined tzaraf. He was successful, and the master of all, blessed be he, revealed himself to him. That's that's seruf is this
While you're speaking
thing.
about, so I was thinking about, so we need the connection of the Elohim for the transformation, for the fast, miraculous transformation of the poisons in the desert, much of which is nuclear, because it's from fuel rock,
Do you mean at Dimona, the Jewish nuclear research establishment, or do you mean the bombs dropped by?
In the casings on both.
Yeah, the uranium shells and stuff. Yeah.
And what I was being shown were scorpions, thousands and thousands. So the connection with nature, the scorpions are the only thing that I know that they think can survive a nuclear holocaust.
So we're going to leave the planet to the scorpions.
Scorpions can. They can be frozen or boiled, and they'll still live. And I believe they can also be nuked, and they'll still live.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So they need to. It's like this thing is of that. It's like asking them if they will eat the pollution.
They eat the pollution.
If they'll eat the pollution.
Well, that's how homeopathy works, isn't it? You get the poison to eat the poison, so to speak,
So that's a really interesting
psychically.
insight. Thank you.
Okay.
Next bit, sorry, I didn't get to the end here. It was just they were showing.
No, that's very interesting. The other thing for Tsa is it's the rune, it's the Sephiroth Netzach, which means victory. And it's when all the wisdom of the upper Sephiroth, like wisdom and holiness and all that, then moves down into manifestation. That's when you get victory. It's when the ideals then actually get actualized. So Netzach. Yeah. And formation, Yetzira, as I said, also comes from it. German Zeit is from the same root, time. Okay, so that's the Tsa, very important thing. Dirk, what was your one you got? Kaf. Yeah.
Wisdom and knowledge, which is hidden.
Right.
Well, it's on both sides.
What was your question?
Well, it was about my family and
about your family.
It was something about my family and how to reunite them. And that's the one I've been getting.
So Kof, the hollow of the hand, is it? Kaf, the one at the top there. Yeah?
No.
C-H-E-T-H.
Oh, Chet, sorry.
Kenas is that.
Ah, okay, I'm with you. Right.
This is the rune of that specific.
Yeah. Right. Okay, that's the CH sound. Yeah, which is like a hard H. There's an H and then there's a Ch sound, which is a harder H, like loch in Scottish. Loch. And it means love. Agape in Greek comes from the same root as chesed, which is mercy or compassion, and which is the Sephiroth of mercy, which balances Gevurah, which is sternness. So you need the G force to be balanced by the gentler, softer C force, CH force, ch. Yeah? So love. And the word Christ comes from the same root, if you think about it, chrism and all that. And the rune, the Sephiroth Chochmah, which is wisdom. And in the runes that translates as Kenaz, which is knowledge, but Hagalaz, which is hidden energies. The rune for H. So it's like, keeping hidden knowledge and then applying it through love to that situation, and it'll all sort itself out. I think it's a good one to get. Yes. Okay, George, what was your one you got?
I thought the question was how can the inner traditions of different geographical areas get some influence to get some unifying together, to work together, to get some influence upon what's taking place.
Right, and you got Reish.
Yeah.
Well, that's an amazing one to get. I'm glad you got that. Because that is R, is an amazingly powerful sound in all the traditions. In Hebrew, it has a meaning of light, and or, A-U-R, is the Hebrew word for light, right? It's also there in the word for spirit, ruach. R is a strong sound, and rabbi is from the same root. Now, this connects to the ancient Egyptian. I couldn't read my Egyptian dictionaries, but I've gone into this in depth. And the word Ra, who's the god of the sun, Ra, is the fire god of light. Yeah, and so in many Egyptian words, that's a very important sound as well as in Hebrew.
What about rhythm? How does that work?
Yes, that's in the Indo-European root. Okay, I'm coming to that. So the rune rido means to ride, which is energy, movement, force. Again, like sun's rays. And so to journey, to go, but also right. That which is right comes from the same root. And rex, a king who rules, and reich, these all come from that same root, as does the word ray, and radius, and reason. Reason is the divine king in all of us, the rex, who governs through the R energy, right? Which is ruach, spirit, or aur, light, or ra. So, I mean, I always say peace will come on the planet when people rediscover their common reason. It's like common sense, Scottish philosophy used to call it. Also, as a prefix to words, means to go back to something, to remember, to reconnect. Even religio, which is reconnecting back to source. Means to go back to source, to get back to where you come from, is the point. And it's also got a lovely meaning of to flow in the Indo-European roots. So that's where the word Rhine comes from, the river Rhine, and rhythm, which is a flowing of beats in time and so on. And the word rune, which is connected to the old word around. Do you know around is a song where you sing one line, you sing another, and it goes round? Around is the same as a rune, because a rune was a mystery whispered from one person to another. And it I'm sharing lots of secrets tonight. These are runes I'm giving you, secrets. You can pass them on to whoever you deem is worthy to share them with, right?
Maybe these groups can do it through some sort of song experience then. Maybe there's a sound experience.
That's one way of doing it. That's one way of doing it, yeah. Yeah.
A way of getting an inner song across to...
Yes, and there are people doing that. I mean, when I was in Israel, I met people that are using music to build bridges across cultures. There's Daniel Barenboim been doing that with Israel-Palestine. There's people in Egypt trying to do that.
I do think the travelling, the actual riado,
yeah, the movement. Yeah. Well, I want to take a peace bus through the Middle East. I want to stick my library on a white Volkswagen van and just travel and do workshops in every town. If I live long enough, I promise I'm going to do that. The origin word, origin, comes from this root of motion.
That's an African as well, isn't it? Rurik, and
Nicholas Rurik, yeah.
He worked with a sort of common spark from different nations.
Sure, no, he was a good traveller in the old days. And orient comes from this root, meaning to rise. Arithmetic comes from this root R, meaning to join, which is where the word art comes from. So a number of people here work with the arts. The arts are about joining things together. And the Greek word arete means virtue. Comes from the same. I love all these sounds, but I really like the R sound because it's got so many good words. And also ur, meaning the original. In German you say Ursprache, all that. Meaning, the ur. Sorry?
Actually, Reich. Third Reich.
Well, the Reich is the government. Is the rule, But the Third Reich was misnamed. It didn't happen. It was foolish. Bloody corporals screwed it all up. Ursprung means original, doesn't it? And John Gebser, great philosopher, wrote Ursprung und Gegenwart, which is one of the great philosophical texts, sort of post-Heidegger, about philosophy, and I'm working on a similar thing following on. Also to read, and in Arabic there are lots of words. Rashid means a director, and Rasul is a messenger. Someone that brings the R energy to mankind is a Rasul. Muhammad was a Rasul. It's more than just being a prophet. It's somebody who brings all that wisdom and then puts it out there for the common people, right? So that's it's a big one, that. So those are some of the answers you could marshal for that, George. Does that help you? Does that make sense? I mean, there's about 4 pages on R in here, or 6 pages. I could only summarise briefly here. Right, Margot, what was your rune you got? The rune first. The rune first. Yeah.
S.
Ah.
Samek.
Samek. Right, or Sawulo, yeah. Ah. And what was the question?
Is it ever possible for the Western mind to comprehend fully the background and diversity of tribal culture without direct experience on the ground? And is it bordering on arrogance for the political pundits who often have a very cursory understanding of what is really needed?
That's a great question. I love that. Okay, the answer is the S, is what we've been shown. The Samek is the coiled up snake. In the Hebrew, it's like a little circular shape. In the runes, it's more snaky looking. It's a hard edged snake. And the S sound is always connected with snakes in the early tradition. Now, it seems to be connected to the idea of the Kundalini energy at the base of the spine. The hiss sound, the s, is the energy that we all carry within us, which is where the sushumna is, which is the inner cerebrospinal fluid circulating in the inner bit of the spine, which we call a spine, right? And it's the origin of the word secret in Hebrew, which is sud, S-W-D, and also safar, meaning number, which is very important, and sephiroth, which, we've talked about Kabbalah, right? So the S is what snakes around and connects everything up, right? Wiggles about, nobody notices it, but it's healing and connecting everything. Solomon, you probably know, was given his magic powers because a snake licked his ears clean when he was asleep at night, and that he woke up, he could understand the language of animals. That's a Sufi story, but the rabbis believe that too. And it's there also, therefore, in the name Sarah, which means a princess, and in Arabic, Saeed means a prince. It's someone who has the power of that S, right? And Salam, meaning peace, the greeting, and also Islam. Someone who surrenders to the S, the incredible power of the S. You've won, because you've got peace, right? The whole point of Islam was to bring mankind back to that experience, right? Unfortunately, mankind being what mankind is, they misunderstood a lot of the message. This is my reading of it, and regard it as an opportunity to go around killing people. That's completely the opposite to what was intended, I believe. And so the true Islam is connected with the secret of Samek and the S, and Solomon. Seer in Arabic means a secret as well, and it goes back to Egyptian Isis, which is also the origin of the word Sufi, is connected with this purity, and Osiris. Now in runic and Anglo-Saxon runes and so on, Sawulo is the sun. The sun is our word for this S secret. We don't call it Ra, we call it the sun, because we're an S. The Anglo-Saxons are S people, The Greeks talk like this S. They talk about Sophia, primal wisdom. The Romans liked it. They call it sapiens. Lots of words from seeing is how we plug into the sunlight, and the seer, who has insight, and also the word soul, which in Old Anglo-Saxon is spelled S-A-U-W-O-L, sawol, and their word for the body was a sawolhus, which I think is really a soul house. What?
The poor soul means a poor soul.
You still say that?
Not a poor soul.
Yeah. Well, they say Scots is a direct descendant of Old Anglo-Saxon, with lots of words in it that come from Anglo-Saxon, which the rest of modern English lost. Scots is actually a descendant directly of Anglo-Saxon. And that's an example of it. Yeah. To say comes from this, there's a root there. And self. What this secret S is inside us all is our self. That's the secret. And also the Greeks, being philosophers, they said that's ousia, meaning the essence of something. And Aristotle talked about the ousia is what you've got to find. It's also the word spirit, which is the secret circulating energy within us all that makes us a self. And then there's loads of words which have syn, meaning synthesis, and together. Sin is together in Greek. So there's loads of wonderful words from that. And in Sanskrit, svota is speech. And svota was studied by Panini and Sanskrit grammarians. Everything I'm saying today is would be understood by a Vedic Sanskrit grammarian. And they'd say, he's just talking about svota. We knew that thousands of years ago. But what I'm saying is, okay, thank you, we know you know, but it's the runes and the Kabbalah that also know. So we can have a level playing field here.